Hello and welcome to my presentation on how race has affected wages in America between 2013 and 2016. My first slide is on the motivation or background as to why I chose this topic. I was interested in looking at the right-wing political shift and the effects that can have. Now, black Americans have suffered huge inequality in America for decades, and racism, in my opinion, has been on the rise worldwide in recent years. So it'd be interesting to see how these affect black people in professional areas. Furthermore, being from an ethnic minority myself, I've been subject to racism over the years. My next slide is on the literature review. So the first paper I used was from the Economic Policy Institute. Now this closely looks at the black-white wage gap before 2016. This looks at a difference between men and women, experienced workers, and education, to name a few factors. It gives a very detailed look at these factors by providing graphs and data for how different people suffer different levels of a wage gap. The second paper I've looked at is from Business Insider. Now, this looks at women specifically and how different ethnic groups of women are affected. Moving on, we have the theoretical model. So the first model I've used economically is the Gini coefficient and the Lorenz curve. So the Lorenz curve has a 45-degree line which shows perfect equality. A country will have a curve underneath this line which shows their level of inequality. The Gini coefficient takes the area between these two curves and divides it by the entire area underneath the perfect equality line. And this will give you an indication of how unequal a society as a whole is. The USA has one of the highest figures of developed economies according to OECD. Now this means that they have the highest level of inequality compared to other developed economies around the world. I will also look at the labour market to see how wage differentials can be affected. Moving on to the empirical model. So this shows my formula, or my equation, which is YT equals beta 1 race plus beta 2 gender plus beta 3 education plus an error term. YT will give me the wage gap, and the error term will show any white noise which may be affecting the wage gap. The other variables are self-explanatory. So the method I will be using will be OLS, which is ordinary least squares. Now this minimises the sum of squared distances between each point in the set parallel to the axis. To perform these tests, I will be using panel data. This involves performing a regression on the panel data, and I'll be using RStudio. My next slide is the hypothesis test, which describes the test that I will be carrying out. So I will be testing beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3 to see their level of significance at 5%. Now what this means is I will be testing how much of an impact, if any at all, race, gender, and education may have on a black-white wage gap. I would expect beta 1 and beta 2 to have the biggest impact, which means that I would expect race and gender to have the biggest impact on a black-white wage gap. When performing these tests, I will get a p-value. This p-value will need to be less than 5% to show significance. If I get a negative sign for any of my beta hat estimators, then that will show that the variable has a high magnitude. These will then mean rejecting a null hypothesis where beta is 0. Now my data will be primarily from IPUMS USA. This is good because it is focused purely on America. I don't have any other countries involved with it at all. It also has all of the variables there and ready for all of the tests that I need. The data is reliable because it comes directly from an American survey which is given to American residents. This is also good because it's compatible with RStudio, which means that I can download the data, extract it, and use it in RStudio, and it will work fine. I will also use some of the graphs and data from the papers specifically the ones from the Economic Policy Institute and the Business Insider. These will both be helpful to me in proving how race has affected wages in America. Finally, we have the level of aggregation. So this is, for me, the level of aggregation is individual. It provides a higher level of focus on how people's wages are affected, and it gives a clear view on a black-white wage gap. So I could have used countrywide or industry-wide data, but I decided not to. I don't think that this would be specific enough to show how a black person's wages would be affected compared to a white person's wages. This is the end of my presentation. On the very last slide, you will see references for the papers that I have used and for the data that I have used from external sources and not from iFarms. Thank you for listening.